very happy, and I also feel privileged to introduce our podcast guest, His Grace Archbishop Michael Jackson. He has served as the Archbishop of Dublin and Bishop of Glendalough in the Church of Ireland for the last 15 years. And that's a position in the Church of Ireland where he is the Primate of Ireland, second actually only to the Archbishop of Armagh. He's the chairman of Dublin City Interfaith Forum, where I know him from, and he's a representative of the Church of Ireland on that forum. And I should also say that I know him as articulate, thoughtful, and I thank him for supplying a foreword to my book, Reflections Volume 1. And I thank him in advance for doing this podcast with me and with us, you know.
Thank you.
As the name suggests, it's leading dialogues. And I think you'll agree with me that dialogue is hugely important. This is a conversation. First of all, I noticed that there was a disestablishment anniversary, 150th anniversary some time ago, and at that you mentioned a church without borders. And this you brought up, but maybe you could give us a brief historical overview of the Diocese of Dublin and Glendalough, and actually the Church of Ireland, really, which I think is categorized as both Protestant and Catholic somehow, and go back to St. Patrick himself in many people's views. And it is deemed to be autocephalous of the Anglican, part of the Anglican Communion. So it is not exactly under the jurisdiction as I would see it, but certainly there's an association, and maybe you could give us a background about that.
Well, thank you very much indeed. You started with the disestablishment of the Church of Ireland 150 years ago, 1869, 1870, and the phrase "a church without borders." And there were two phrases I remember in particular from that time, one of which was that phrase which came directly from the Archbishop of Canterbury, whom we asked to preach at an act of worship during that anniversary year. Another phrase we had was "free to shape our own future." And the independence of the Church of Ireland from the Church of England, which was effected in 1869, 1870, left the Church of Ireland, as you say, autocephalous. We had to find our own way in an environment which was not necessarily going to be benign. In fact, there were many reasons why it might be hostile. One reason I would suggest is that the Church of Ireland, before disestablishment, was the Church of England and Ireland, and was very, very much tied up with the political landscape, whereby England and Ireland were one, well, not one country, but one body of people governed, particularly by what we now might call the Westminster government. So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is when you combine or conflate politics and religion, you're asking for a lot of tension, particularly when your minority is actually a very tiny minority. At the height of its size, the Church of England and Ireland was no more than 12 to 14% of the population of the whole island. And therefore, this body benefited materially from the work and the money of the whole population. And that's not how we see religion now, but it was how it was seen then. The Church of Ireland, like other Christian churches in Ireland, and also like other faith traditions, covers or straddles the whole of the island of Ireland. And I think in a way what the Archbishop of Canterbury was trying to get across to us was that we have a responsibility to live beyond the limitation of being bordered. Now, in so many ways, I think the pre-Brexit Ireland had effectively done away with a political border. And that was a great kind of lifting of the mind and the psyche of people. Not only was it free travel and free trade, but it would have enabled something which you have described earlier, Swami, as being very important, a dialogue of life, a dialogue of ideas, and a dialogue of the imagination. I think, to be fair, much of that has continued, even though Brexit happened in 2016. People in Northern Ireland, if they had had a separate or an independent vote, actually voted to remain in the European Union. But because it was a first past the post system across the UK, they came out as well. That again, of course, was politicized, but many people have continued to see the benefit of a wider belonging. So it's that idea of a wider belonging that I would take out of those words, which have to do with the whole idea of a church without or beyond borders. You mentioned St. Patrick. I think St. Patrick is probably claimed by everybody. I think it seems to me that at some point, definitively, Christianity was introduced to Ireland. It clusters around the name of Patrick, and all traditions, as it were, honour St. Patrick in a very particular way. Why? I suppose because if you look at St. Patrick's own writings, he was here as a slave. He escaped, he left, but he felt the call from God to come back to the Irish people who, at that stage, emotionally and spiritually, were his people. And I think that level of belonging, that level of commitment, is something that we'd like to carry forward in the way in which we live our religious lives. The other thing is the simplicity, I suppose, of his teaching and the way in which he took the complexity of the doctrine of the Trinity within the Christian tradition, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons in one God, and explained that by means of a simple plant, the shamrock, and said, there are shamrocks everywhere. Just try and see that this is an image of the God whom I'm presenting to you. Now, inevitably, as you know yourself, somebody who offers simplicity as a shop window is a sophisticated person who has thought through a whole range of other complexities. And so I think Patrick remains an object of fascination. One of the interesting things as well, I suppose, is the scattering or the diaspora of Irish people across the world has meant that Patrick has an affection in other countries and in other realms and in other nations, which in many ways, I think, far outstrips specific, as it were, national heroes of other countries. And that's just one of our good fortunes.
And I think, across the range of religions now in Ireland, we would certainly see the spiritual value of St. Patrick's life and the symbolic enslavement. Our aim in our tradition is not heaven or anything; it's freedom. And so to us as well, St. Patrick is very precious. Even the breastplate prayer, which I'm not
Yes.
sure was his or not, but, Christ be before me, Christ be, on all sides, in other
Yeah,
words.
I mean, all of that. I mean, in many ways, with St. Patrick, it's add water and stir. You can take something and make something of it that you need. The breastplate, as you rightly say, gives some sense of the fact that the Almighty, the deity, surrounds you, and that you have both, I suppose, the protection of that, but also the need to engage with something which comes out very clearly, I think, in the Christian scriptures towards the end of the Gospels. Don't be looking for Jesus Christ here. He's already gone ahead of you into Galilee. So, so much, I think, of what we can learn together as faith traditions is not so much invention, but disclosure. If we disclose the presence, the footfall, the being of God to ourselves through a person's spirituality and to others through a public spirituality and, I suppose, articulation of that through worship, through preaching, through gathering, that is something. And I think that does connect us, as you rightly say, with St. Patrick. There are other aspects. Also, I think his identification with people of every position in society is a very important thing. And it's very important for us, I suppose, now in the Church of Ireland, because we are a very small minority, and it's more difficult for what was once a larger minority to become a smaller minority.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, the Church of Ireland is the second largest religion in Ireland, as
That's
I
true.
understand it, And I think that's about to shift and change over the years, just looking at the various trends. Perhaps Islam will take the place of the second largest religion. I don't know. But definitely it's a changing world. And we have a perception, I suppose, historically, of Christianity being a very exclusivist kind of religion, claiming we are the only way, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But you're the chairman of the Dublin City Interfaith Forum, and I suppose we have something of a different view of it, that is maintaining our traditional stances, but at the same time seeing the interweaving aspect of religion in general and the commonality that we have and the value that that has in today. So as chairman, how would you see that?
Well, I think your question is pertinent and problematic, which is why I'm very glad to try and take it. For some people, I imagine, to see someone in my position engage, I would argue, fully and emotionally with the Dublin City Interfaith Forum is probably anathema. They probably say, I should be spending my time enabling people who are not members of the Christian tradition to become members of the Christian tradition, and those who are members of the Christian tradition to become better members of the Christian tradition. That's supposed to be my day job. My argument would be not to disrespect that view, but actually to challenge it, I hope politely and benignly. To me, it's essential as we plot our path and live our lives in a diverse and a complicated society, where there is freedom to express yourself religiously and freedom to worship, to know your neighbor, to engage with your neighbor, and equally importantly, to let your neighbor engage with you. So you're not simply engaging with somebody in your terms, you're actually listening attentively and engaging differently from the way in which you would with people from within your own tradition. I would argue further that to present something of, to present in some way the totality of your own tradition to other people is actually energizing in two ways. First of all, it enables Christianity or the Church of Ireland tradition to go public. Secondly, it requires of you that you will take questions and criticisms, and that's always important and healthy for what is an organic understanding of the Christian tradition to survive and to develop and to respond. The other thing is that there has to be an essential and basic humility that you can learn from the practice of other traditions. And I think if you dig down deep enough within aspects of Christianity, Christianity has always been engaging with other world faiths because it has an international footfall, and therefore to have the opportunity to do that in the place where you live, a few stops away on the Lewis or wherever you're meeting, and to meet people who themselves carry with them an increasingly tailor-made local expression of an international faith tradition is a wonderful thing to be able to do. I'd say just a couple more things. In relation to both interfaith work and also working with the orthodox traditions within Christianity, I'm able to say with an entirely clear conscience, any international gatherings I attend, I say this is exactly like being at home, because I meet all of the traditions who are here, back in my own place. And through the good offices of, I suppose, the Lord Mayor of Dublin, Dublin City Council, whenever I would have visiting groups from abroad, whether, for example, they be from the Anglican Diocese of Jerusalem or the Diocese of Chotanagpur in the Church of North India, I would always seek to bring them to the Mansion House and bring not only members of the ecumenical body that works for Dublin, but also the interfaith body. And one of the fascinating things, just linguistically for me to see, is those who are Anglicans like me in Jerusalem and in the West Bank, or in Jordan or in Lebanon, talking with people in Ireland who are Muslims and who talk Arabic. So there's the linguistic identity, which in a way has been pushed to one side because of the particularity or the priority of the religious belonging. And to see that linguistic and cultural connection coming out is also very important. Same thing, of course, can happen with Indian Christians in relation to other Indian Christians who are here and other Indian people who are here. So you get that sense that language, while so often used as a way of suppression and repression, can actually be the liberation towards new relationship.
I always remember I was presenting the subject of Hinduism to a predominantly Roman Catholic audience. And they said, "We're surprised you're not Indian." I said, "I'm also surprised that you don't speak Italian or or Aramaic, you know."
Yes.
So, but I mean, I would say some people may say that you have quite a radical approach to the use of Church of Ireland sacred spaces. I remember that on one occasion, probably annually, the Sikhs use the Christ Church
Yes.
as on their celebration of Guru Nanak's birthday. And so what would you say about that? Because there's a traditional view of a sacred space being
Yeah.
reserved for that particular tradition, you know.
Indeed. Yep.
And this is a wonderful broadening out of a space that you use.
I'm very pleased that you've taken that phrase, sacred space. I'd say a couple of things to begin with, and I'll take you back to the time when I arrived in Dublin. I'd come directly from my home diocese of Clogher, which is basically, I suppose, County Fermanagh, County Monaghan, parts of County Tyrone, small parts of County Leitrim, County Donegal, and County Cavan. So there was an area which is on the political border. And when the invitation list for those who might attend my service of enthronement, that's when you are put to sit in the cathedra, the seat in your cathedral. I said, would it be possible for us, because I would very much like it, to invite representatives of other world faiths? And the cathedral said, certainly. And those people came. I suppose I got the sense then, Swami, that to be in Christ Church Cathedral was not anathema to those people of the different faith traditions, nor again was their presence anathema to the people, as it were, who at that stage ran Christ Church Cathedral. And so, and I suppose as well as sacred space and holiness being intrinsic to the tradition, which happens to be its custodian, and of which individuals successfully are the leaders. I also am very strong on the idea of sanctification by use. And if you bring with you the fullness, or as much of the fullness as you can comprehend, of generosity of your own tradition, you actually don't need to protect that tradition from anybody. And the sharing of it in a way that's wholesome actually enlarges and enlivens the experience of the people who are its custodians, and may actually enable those who are there for an evening or a couple of days or whatever to experience something which takes them even momentarily away from the darker side of Christianity, the bellicose side of Christianity, the fact that Christians spent decades fighting one another in Europe, and all of these things, because these are, as it were, darker alleyways of our own identity, our existence, and our lived and documented history. The other thing I would say is that it is always a pleasure to welcome people who are spiritually and temperamentally curious, while there is the reciprocity of respect. And so, as part of this, I'm more than happy to attend events in religious buildings, sacred space of other traditions, that is, traditions other than my own. Sometimes, for example, with the Muslims, this happens with Eid. I've been to your center. All of that I find enriching and enlivening because values, motivation, social cohesion. While we live in a secular state, and Ireland is not a repressive secular state, it is a secular state. While we live in a secular state, much of the motivation of people, in fact, is their faith. And that, in a way, is why they contribute to the totality of the society. And I think that, to me, is a very roundabout way, maybe, of saying that all of this is part of what I see as the kind of kaleidoscope of dialogue.
Now, if I may say, you don't shy away from controversy from what I see. So there are two things I'd like to mention. One really is not controversial. You laid out, if I recall correctly, I'm going to call them 5 steps.
Yeah.
It might have been labeled something differently. Anyway, and I saw, and of course it was orientated toward Christian values, but I found them very universal.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to adapt that and use that as a very wonderful framework, if you will.
Very good. I'm very interested.
Yeah. So maybe you could just briefly give us those 5 steps.
Well, maybe I can, maybe I can't. I remember, I think in particular, the point
Sorry, I've
at
caught you on
which,
the hop on this because
no, I can remember particularly the point where I first floated this in what you might call a public forum. There was an opportunity which was, I think, created by that wonderful person known to you and me, Adrian Christie, in the civic offices of Dublin City Council, just closer to the river from Christ Church Cathedral. And I was asked to talk about something to do with maybe social values, whatever. I took the 5 marks of mission of the Anglican Communion.
That's it, sorry, 5 marks.
And I applied them to aspects of social life and the understanding of what actually people of principle, people of practice, people of faith do. 2 of them would probably be preaching and teaching. Another then would move into aspects of social justice and care, and then care of creation. My thesis in this is that, let's say, the learning and the teaching, the listening and the articulation are specific to the traditions. You have yours, I have mine, the state has its. Others have theirs. But actually, when you come to the final 3, you're actually talking about drawing all of this together. Caring for people, social justice, and care of the environment are common to us all as neighbors and as inhabitants of a needy world, a creation of whom we are part. So what I'm saying is you bring your principles and your values, then you bank them with others, and then you apply them to the needs of the society. The way in which Dublin City Dublin City Interfaith Forum has developed, and I mean you've been very much a contributor to this, is that it's not that we lay aside our traditions. We talk more and more about contributing to social cohesion. But why do we do that? Because it matters to us from the perspective of our motivations, and our motivations, when push comes to shove, come from our faith. So what I was trying to do was to allow people to bring what is their motivation, what is their faith, what are their principles, what are their beliefs, and share those and engage them around what actually will be a lived faith in the world of our inhabiting. Does that help?
Absolutely. I mean, our point of view is that at the very bottom, we are all involved in pure spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's a bit like the ocean and waves. And the differences might be in the waves, but the ocean is, pretty solid. I said you don't shy away from controversy. And so polyester Christians, that phrase comes up.
That was not my phrase. That was somebody else's phrase.
Yes.
Yeah.
Executive powers issues and so on and so forth. So my question to you really would be, what is your personal recipe for dealing with thorny issues?
My personal recipe for dealing with thorny issues, which perhaps can I just go back to the 5 marks? I've thought of them now. Teach, tell, tend, transform, treasure.
That's it.
You teach the content of your faith. You tell it to others. You tend those who are in need. You transform unjust structures, and you treasure the earth.
That's it. Wonderful.
So that's sorry. I just didn't have them right in my head. My recipe may sound very predictable. I try to keep my eyes open to see what's happening, to see what people are saying. And I let them, as it were, percolate in my head and in my mind. I pray on a regular and probably on what many would regard to be an unstructured sort of way, although I've structured prayer as well. I, as it were, empty my mind and let God take what's there and reform it, repackage it. That helps me to come to decisions around action. That, of course, sits alongside formal worship and formal prayer and listening to scripture and seeking to interpret it. But it's in many ways, it's the combination of perception and letting God take those perceptions, which would encourage me then, so to speak, to go for it. So this is a risky way of doing things, I know, but I'm not trying to be either a messiah or a martyr. All I'm trying to do is to do something like discern spiritually the signs of the times and to be a voice of people. Now, when you talk about polyester, that was not my phrase, somebody else used that, but I mean, I am not shying away from what I did. I did seek to call out something which was an unarticulated component in the life of my tradition, which was sectarianism. That was associated very much, if not exclusively, with people in and from Northern Ireland. But my perception of this was that it was also alive and kicking in the Republic of Ireland. And alongside my saying that and eliciting a strong and a negative reaction, and I think somebody in the communications world said, this ran for 3 weeks in the Irish Times. It was the longest lasting, specifically religious issue in the history of the newspaper. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it was an interesting thing to hear. the number of people who actually wrote to me say, very glad you said that because I've experienced this. At the end of the day, I'll never forget it, I had 13 letters of people who wrote to me, disgusted, angry. So I asked my secretary simply to catalogue these, hold on to them. I then sat down using the same method I've mentioned to you and wrote a benign letter of explanation and goodwill to all of them. 12 people were satisfied with them. One person wrote back and said, I don't and can't agree with you, but you seem to be a nice guy. So that's how it happened. My hope would, I'm not trying to create a platform for myself at all. What I would be concerned to do would be to give voice to some people who felt that nobody was articulating something that they had experienced or something that mattered for them. And I felt I could do it because I grew up very happily right on the border in Northern Ireland. I had worked there as the bishop of the people with whom I'd been to school, people I knew for 9 years. I was not hurting them at all. I was not actually trying to hurt anybody here. I was just saying we need to understand something of our own underworld and examine it if we're going to move forward without prejudice. That's all I'm trying to do.
We have a phrase which is actually the Indian national motto, but it's derived from one of our scriptures, the Mundaka Upanishad, which says Satyameva Jayate, means truth alone triumphs.
Yeah.
And the method of settling into divine grace, putting oneself in a listening mode, and allowing inner guidance to take hold rather than interfere with things on an individual basis that could be flawed, could be right, could be wrong, is a wonderful formula. And I think you've outlined that very well as well.
Well, it's what I seek to do, not with any self-congratulation, but simply as a way of letting God lead me.
Yes. There are, of course, there are various other issues that we could discuss. I'm conscious of our time as well, though. But I would say, I think you'd agree with me that the world is changing radically. We're pretty similar in age. I'm 76 years of age.
Yeah.
I say I've had 76 free rides around the zodiac.
Yes, yeah.
And but we are living in a very different era, and we've both seen these changes over our lifetimes. And now we're in a new era of AI, and also an era where organized religion as a whole seems to have been in decline in Ireland, but also the rest of Europe,
Yes.
UK, and so on and so forth. And so I wonder why you think it might be, and is there any scope to adjust that, if necessary, in a new kind of way that would be appealing, foundational, would answer difficulties from a human point of view, as well as today a scientific point of view?
That's a fair and an unfair question. It's fair that you ask. The idea of finding an answer may be impossible. I suppose a number of things. I think God has given us both religion and science. And playing the one off against the other to no end is not actually fruitful. The other thing is the people who either are adherents of or observers of or antagonistic towards our faith traditions are the same people as ourselves who inhabit the world of today. So if you want to put it in a cheerful sort of way, we're all in it together. Sometimes when I talk to people, I say to them, well, of course, I come from the previous millennium. Well, I do. I mean, you come from the previous millennium, and they sort of laugh. But actually, I remember a time when there was no such thing as a mobile telephone. I also remember the time when you tried to keep your conversation within specific minutes, because if you strayed by a few seconds into the next minute, you were charged for the whole of that minute. I mean, this now seems daft to people because the whole thing is funded by, in a whole different way, by advertising and all sorts of things. In relation to the state of the world today, to me, the very important thing is that to many people who probably come and talk to you, listen to you, the world seems to be beyond them. It's something they cannot touch. It will not hear them. They are, as it were, like a table tennis ball in front of an armored tank. And that, I think, is the perception that people have. The problem with this is that it very quickly embeds as a reality in people's minds, that they cannot influence anything that's going on. What I would argue as well, and it comes through very early, I think, in the Christian scriptures, you have it where the Pharisees and Herodians try to trick Jesus around the coin, which has the head of Caesar and the inscription of Caesar. And he says, render to Caesar things that are Caesar's and the thing that are God, to God. You then take that into the epistle to the Romans, where, of course, it's bound to be, because you're talking about speaking to the empire. But what am I saying is we have to come to some accommodation with the states in which we live and who we are. Now, there are some people for whom, in all our traditions, that simply is not possible, because the states are so repressive. The things that we take for granted, like human rights, they don't actually hold. So it's very difficult to generalize in globalizing. But I think the future is already very different for organized, structured, institutional religion. Sometimes problems come about not only because of difficulty, but because of sophistication. The opportunity that people have to assimilate perspectives, analyses, information means that people preside more and more over their own selves. What does that require? It actually requires that people dig deep down to the spiritual that's in them if they're going to reach an equilibrium. I think this is where what I might refer to as conventional institutional religion still has a massive role. The fact that we keep the festivals, the fact that we use the liturgies, the fact that the scriptures, which were written in totally different contexts, still matter as an anchor to belief, interpretation, and engagement matters. There will be fewer of us doing it. And if you want my really honest answer in relation to the sort of church to which I belong, I no longer have a strong sense of where the money will come from to do this, because the money is vital if you're going to open the doors. That's not simply because you have to comply with everything to do with health and safety, everything to do with regulation. It simply is the fact that you do need money if you're going to be generous to other people. So what I think is going to happen is that there will be fewer, as it were, dynamic pockets, and a kind of social evolution, and the impact of geography will be such that a number of churches just will cease to exist. The places will become depopulated for the present. You cannot carry all of the past into the future. It has never worked that way, and there's no reason that it should. The important thing is, again, in a simple phrase, that those of us tasked with the custodianship should make every effort to keep the light on and to keep it more than flickering. And I think, certainly in my own tradition, if it were possible to encourage those who are adherents and those who are practicing to be joyful in their presentation and to be willing to talk of their faith, not in an aggressive way, but talk of their faith in their workplace. This, I think, would be a massive contribution of what lies at the heart, actually, of how I understand the ministry that I try to offer, which is discipleship. It's one thing to look at me and say, he's a Christian leader. I am actually primarily a Christian disciple. I'm a follower before I'm a leader. And I think the sharing of that idea of followership is something that's really important and actually is dynamic and hasn't really been tapped. And it ties back into those 5 marks of mission as well. So that, I suppose, my perspective.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to end off with one more thing, and that is, and I thank you for your insight. And what you have said applies, although you're saying your tradition, I think much of this applies to every tradition. And this is, I believe, the value of having something like this, a podcast, which is called Leading Dialogues, and is about dialogue. It's not about argument. It's not about you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa. It's about understanding each other through talking, and empathy along with it. And
Yep.
applying the values that we all have, namely seeing the divine in the other. And we have different words for that, seeing Christ in the other or seeing whatever it is. But that's the basis of it. My last real question to you is, what uplifting message? I mean, the world is not worse or better off than 100 years ago, in my view. It's just that we know much more about it because of the media. But what uplifting message do you have for the people?
Yeah, it's very simple. Know your neighbor, love your neighbor, let your neighbor know you, let your neighbor love you.
And with those words, we can conclude this podcast.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Pleasure.